This is the second installment of the story of Ron and Reg Kray, those lords of London in the 1950s and 60s. If you're thinking, wait, no, second? That's okay, easily fixed. Go back to last week and listen to that episode first. It's okay, episode 2 isn't going anywhere. You can come back. This is your trigger warning, peeps. This episode talks about violence and murder. If this is unexpected for you, this is a true crime podcast, so we will start you off with Cilla Black, and I will see you on the other side.
Anyone who ever loved could look at me and know that I love you. Anyone who ever dreamed could look at me and know I dream of you. Knowing I love you so. Anyone who had a heart would take me in his arms and love me too. Couldn't be another heart that hurt me like you hurt me and be so untrue. What am I to do?
Now, in all of this is the interesting topic of the twins' sexuality. Things changed in the swinging 60s, but they didn't change that much, and certainly not that fast. The twins notoriously pushed social boundaries, but I still find it odd that the fact that Ron was openly homosexual and Reg identified as bi, and no one seems to have a bad word to say about this. A bit odd for the times. Ron himself had a problem with camp, effeminate guys and insisted that he wasn't gay, he was homosexual. The boys Ron was running as his spies were also his toy boys. The paid company, when he was hiding out, was also male. Ron was, however, very against any public displays of affection, so that may have helped in his favor. Of course, it also didn't hurt that Ron was a bit sadistic. If you're going to have a problem with a gay guy who will run you through with a bayonet for calling him a poof, you tend to keep your comments to yourself. But even interviews made today with people who knew them, no one I've heard has made a negative comment at all. Reggie fancied both men and women, but Ron had an actual aversion to females, claimed they'd only give you grief and STDs. So when Reg met and fell for Frances Shay, it drove an uncomfortable wedge in the relationship. Some sources say that Reg had actually come calling for Frances's brother Frankie, but when 16-year-old Frances answered the door, Reggie was instantly smitten. Other sources say that 14-year-old Frances was a regular at her father's gambling club, and Reg's love at first sight wasn't quite so instant. Ron, however, hated her. Reggie proposed less than a year later. Frances didn't feel ready to be a wife, so she turned him down. But Reggie really wouldn't take no for an answer and kept asking. 4 years later, 1965, the two were married. But Ron wasn't the only vexation in this marriage. Frances's parents did not like Reg, or the business the Krays were in. Frank Shay, the father, did have his hand in a gambling club, and was not a complete straight arrow either, but his, a bit tilted business model, was a far cry from the Krays' labyrinth, with 2 minotaurs at the center. But since Frank did some business with the Krays, he knew what the darker side of Reg looked like, not to mention Ron's darker side. In addition, Frances had her own psychological troubles. She was prone to dark, depressive episodes, and she tried to commit suicide several times. The couple marched down the aisle in April of 1965. And they went to Athens on their honeymoon. But as immediate as his love is reputed to have begun, it seemed to vanish, replaced by his need for her to be a trophy wife, and promote his image of a flash mobster of the people. Frances couldn't stand the cold shoulder, the cold nights alone, or the frigid shade from Ronnie. She soon left Reg to return to her parents' home. Reg then takes a page out of Jeffrey MacDonald's book, or perhaps MacDonald took a page from Reg. He started phoning the Shay house, trying to win Frances back. He would come by the house with presents, and when that didn't work, he would threaten her that no other man would want her now that she had been his. Urban legend has it that Ron was elated when she left Reg, but really annoyed that his brother kept trying to get her back. Wagging tongues have it that Ron gave her drugs to ease the pain and made sure it would be an overdose. Mainstream lore says that Frances believed Reggie about her never being able to be free of him, and she took her own life. At 24. The Shea family asked that Frances be laid in the cemetery next to her grandparents. In a metaphorical fuck you, Reggie lay Frances next to the Krays. Once Ron and Reg Kray were lords of London's East End, being a big fish in a small pond was not going to satisfy them. They wanted the power and glamour of New York's 5 families, and expanding their territory was high on their bucket list. In 1960, Reg acquired the West End club Esmeralda's Barn. It was here where the twins really pushed the glitterati theme, and their status as celebrities really skyrocketed. They were soon courting a relationship with Angelo Bruno, known as the Gentle Don and head of the Philadelphia crime family. Their first official meeting is said to have been at the London Hilton in 1962. It was soon followed by further meetings which would include representatives of New York's Lucchese family. From crimelibrary.org, quote, on April 15, 1965, a raid took place on the Royal Bank of Canada in Montreal. Another occurred in May on a bank in Ontario. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of negotiable bonds were stolen. Through their contacts in the American Mafia, the twins were offered a share of these. Heavily discounted, of course. In July, Payne flew to Montreal and purchased a part of this stolen shipment at a price 25% of their face value. The twins disposed of them in England, and being a lucrative traffic in these instruments, which in due course brought them into contact with Alan B. Cooper, a 36-year-old American businessman with interests in insurance and a private bank located off Wigmore Street, Marylebone, in the West End. He was a mystery man. He had rumored links to gold smuggling rings in the Far East, arms dealing of a dubious nature, and possible ties to American and British security agencies. The twins needed him to facilitate the registration of a particularly large batch of stolen Canadian government bonds. He agreed to help them if they would be his ally. He was being strong-armed by a couple of gangsters from South London and wanted Reggie and Ronnie to act as a buffer. They agreed. End quote. The gangsters for which Cooper needed a buffer were the Richardsons. In 1964, one member of the firm named George Cornell switched allegiances to that of the Richardson Gang. Also known as the Torture Gang, the Richardsons ran the territory in South London. Sources say that Cornell was the type to go where he had the best deal. He started as a member of the Streeters. This was that gang against whom Ron had led the attack with the bayonet. They say that it was after he moved to the Torture Gang that he began to hate Ronnie Kray. I suspect it started long before. Whatever the case, Cornell and Ron had several bust-ups. One was rumored to have left Ron unconscious. Ron would write that Cornell had called him a fat poof, but he would also deny that claim in a 1989 interview, saying instead that Cornell had threatened to kill him. Did you notice the word bust-up? The sources also use the word affray. What, is this a twee Victorian novel? They might as well have said fisticuffs. Jesus, these terms make you think that it was a petty spat among 3-year-olds. In March of 1966, one member of the firm, called Dickie Hart, was killed in one of these episodes of affray. Gang war would have been much more accurate. The day after Dickie's death, Cornell was drinking at the Blind Beggar pub with 2 of his mates, when Ronnie walked into the pub, pulled a gun, and shot Cornell in the head. There was only the barmaid and one other patron in the pub that night. They didn't talk to the cops. The fisticuffs died down after Cornell's death, but the twins, most likely Reggie, were afraid of bad publicity. Remember, they loved their glitterati status. Back when Ron was in Wandsworth, he had met a man named Frank Mitchell. Mitchell was a big man, very strong, liked to show that strength off. But Mitchell was also what they used to call a simpleton. Mitchell was in and out of prisons and borstalls. Borstalls, basically British juvie, for what I can see as petty crimes. Reports from incarceration label him as having a short temper and detail attacks against inmates and jailers alike. However, they also detail his punishments as birch rods and the cat o' nine tails. From what I know about these kinds of punishments, I wonder how much of his attacks were just a child's reaction to being severely beaten on a regular basis. As further proof, he was the ringleader in a mob at one of the boar stalls which rioted. In 1955, Mitchell was diagnosed as quote-unquote defective and sent to Rampton Psychiatric. 2 years later, he and another inmate escaped. When he was recaptured, he went after the cops with meat cleavers. They took him to Broadmoor, where he escaped again, this time from a padded cell. And this time he got in a home of an older couple whom he is said to have held hostage with an axe. The press therefore dubbed him the Mad Axeman. I'm not going to go off too far on this tangent because this is a series about the Krays, but Frank Mitchell is an interesting but tragic figure. People lash out, especially children. Frank's first crime was stealing a bicycle. His punishments were to be locked up and tortured. In his mind, I think he was trying to defend himself. Violence to defend himself against violence. The couple whose house he entered, he was worried about being sent back to Broadmoor, so he came in with an axe, blazing, so to speak. Once he realized they wouldn't be a threat, he had them make everyone a cup of tea, and he changed into the man's clothing. From the Evening Times, July 1958. When he saw how frightened I was, he said, "You're upset. What about me? All the police are looking for me." Further down in the article, before forcing Mr. Peggs into the garage, he insisted that Mrs. Pegg bathe his feet, which were severely cut, and he had no shoes. End quote. Oh, and he would have been only 19 when all this happened, by the way. In any event, Mitchell was told by the prison governor that if he behaved himself, he would be recommended for parole. So, Mitchell behaved himself. He was a model prisoner, but other people went on release from Dartmoor, and he did not. The Krays thought they could break him out. Ron would be doing a favor for a friend and would give them cred in criminal circles. Their plan was to keep him hidden while they started a letter campaign to the Home Office to gain Mitchell release. Because Mitchell was a model prisoner, he was trusted. He was in the Honor Party, which is a small group of prisoners who are allowed to work outside the prison with minimal supervision. Not to beat a dead horse, but the sheer fact that Mitchell was able to get into the Honor Party kind of disproves the notion that he was inherently violent. But anyway, that is where the Krays arranged for their men to pick Mitchell up. On the 16th of December, 1966, it was hours before anyone at Dartmoor realized that Frank was gone. The escape became national news and led to an outcry over the lack of security around the man who had been dubbed the Axeman. There was a manhunt. One member of the firm, Mad Teddy Smith, took time while Frank was in hiding, helping him write letters to national newspapers asking, very articulately and politely, to have a release date. He would then return to prison and finish out his time before the granted parole date. However, the Home Secretary refused to make deals with criminals. Frank started becoming a problem for the Krays. He didn't want to stay cooped up in the flat, and he didn't want to go back to prison, especially indefinitely, without a deal. He was strong and short-tempered, so he was becoming more and more difficult to keep hidden. Frank had also become infatuated with the hostess they had paid to keep him company, and while Liza liked him, she didn't want to stay with him forever. The Krays decided that they had to get rid of him. In our story, Ron says that they smuggled Mitchell out of Britain and he'd been living free all of these years. According to rumor and eventual confession by Reggie's right-hand man, Albert Donahue, on Christmas Eve, they put Frank in the back of a panel van, telling him he was being transferred to a hideout in the country. Mitchell, not wanting to leave without Liza, was told she was going to follow in another car. Once in back of the van, Donahue and several other men opened fire on Frank. They say that they had to keep shooting because he just wouldn't die. Then they wrapped his body in chicken wire and weighted it down and dumped him in the channel. Frank Mitchell's body was never found, and he's still officially on the lam. He was 28 when he died. A skilled confidence man named Leslie Payne had been working with the twins for years. He was a keen businessman and had been the primary manager of the firm going into 1966. But Payne was not a violent man, and he had trouble with the way the Krays used violence on a regular basis. He pulled away from them in early 1966. Worried that Payne would go to the police, the twins hired Jack McVitie to take him out. Known as Jack the Hat, McVitie and the twins had known each other for years, but McVitie had never been an official member of the firm. Ron gave him £500 to take care of Payne, with another $500 on completion of the job. McVitie and his friend Billy went to Leslie Payne's house ready to shoot Payne when he opened the door, but Payne's wife answered the door instead and told the two that Leslie wasn't home. Billy and Jack said they'd come back later, but they never do, and Jack also does not return the money to the Krays. He spends it. Anybody listening who thinks Ronnie Kray would just write this off hasn't been paying attention. October 1967, McVitie is on his way to a party. Unbeknownst to him, the Krays had gotten to the party early and cleared out everyone. When Jack comes in, Reg points a gun and shoots. But the gun malfunctions. McVitie thinks this is the twins' way of teaching him a lesson, but Reg tries to shoot him again. The gun fails to work a second time. At this point, Reggie takes a knife and begins violently stabbing McVitie, basically everywhere. Witnesses say that by the time Reg was finished, some of McVitie's insides were on his outside. After the murder, the Krays paid for the room to be completely redone. Legend also has it that Ron had used this situation to get his brother his first kill. He thought it was time that Reg put a murder under his belt. So it was Ron who insisted that Reg shoot the Hat, and Ron who goaded Reg into stabbing McVitie when the gun jammed. Immediately following the killing, the Krays have some lesser members of the firm take the body away. Now these knuckleheads leave it outside a church, a fact which makes the twins hit the roof. The twins make them go back and move McVitie's body. Some reports say that the body ends up in a freshly dug grave in the cemetery, and others say it ends up in the water off the coast of Sussex. Once the firm really started taking over and the Krays began to illustrate just how violent they could be, the British police force started focusing on eliminating the Krays from the UK streets. Longtime copper Nipper Reid, newly promoted as Detective Chief Super on the London Murder Squad, was tasked with bringing them down. From an April 18, 2020 article by Stuart Heritage in Airmail, quote, "In 1964, fresh from the success of his part in solving the Great Train Robbery, where a gang of thieves stole the equivalent of 61 million from a Royal Mail train, Reid arrested the Krays for the first time on protection racketeering charges. However, he was thwarted by the underworld network that the Krays had erected around themselves. In an interview for the 1990s, the British TV series Gangsters, Reid recalled telling a victim of the Krays about their arrest. She fell down on her knees and grasped my legs in her arms and said, 'Thank God, you've saved my life,' he said, only to see her reappear in court the following day, now resplendent in furs and high-heeled shoes, saying, 'Mr. Reid, I'd like to stand bail for my good friends the Kray Twins.'" End quote. Reid's first foray into taking down the firm came in 1964. There is only rumor and innuendo to tell us why Reid's first effort to take them down was a failure, so take this all with a grain of salt. But Ronnie became acquainted with a conservative MP named Boothby. That much is clear. Some stories say that it was a full-blown affair. Some say that they were wingmen of sorts for each other, each helping the other find sexual partners. Some stories have it that they went to all-out orgies together. Ronnie said that they were essentially just friends. Boothby all-out denied anything more than a very distant acquaintanceship. Male homosexuality was illegal in Britain at this time, Queen Victoria having no idea what gay females could do with one another, and therefore felt the need to ban only the male version. This, in concert with homosexuality being seriously frowned upon by conservatives even today, and you can see why Lord Boothby's word might be a bit suspect in his denial. The potential scandal resulted in MI5 getting involved, and it is therefore possible that spooks had something to do with shutting everyone up. In any event, Nipper did not get anything on the firm worth an arrest in 1964, but that didn't stop him. And the thing is, even those closest to Ron and Reg knew that the twins were getting out of control. In the life of a gangster, violence is a part of life, so you know that things must have been pretty bad for a gangster to say things were getting out of control. And here's several of the gangsters who did business with or knew personally the Krays and their time when they were alive and on the streets. This comes from a documentary called The Krays, The Myth Behind the Legend.
The thing would have been much better if the fucking ironed out the two twins earlier, and it saved a lot of trouble, and a lot of people wouldn't have gone to prison.
I'm glad they're 6 foot under, the best place they can be. Yeah. They were two horrible bastards. You don't hurt your own, but they hurt anybody then.
They were really frightening if you really knew them.
People who say they're lovely boys didn't know them.
They were bloody animals.
I thought they should be ironed out, to be honest.
You thought the Krays should have been shot?
The two of them, yeah.
Why did you think?
Because they was dangerous to everybody, and if they hadn't been arrested when they were, that's what would have happened.
Now, remember the banker Alan Cooper? Well, in early 1968, the Krays were looking to expand their business yet again, and they had another meeting with Angelo Bruno. You know, Philly crime boss Angelo Bruno. And this time, Ronnie really wants to impress the American mob. So he decides to organize several high-profile assassinations, and he turns to Alan Cooper for help. Cooper gets a guy to run up to Glasgow to get some dynamite. But Nipper had Cooper under surveillance and knew something was going on. The dynamite gopher is picked up, and he confesses the whole thing to the cops. So Reed has Cooper brought in and is about to charge him when Cooper hits him with a whammy. Cooper has been working for Scotland Yard and the U.S. Treasury Department. Nipper is more than mildly annoyed, particularly since he'd not been told of an inside man in the firm. He can't charge Cooper, but maybe he could force him to testify. The decision was made to hit the firm all at once, so no one would be able to warn anyone else. On the night of May 8th, morning of May 9th, 1968, Reed's task force hit 24 addresses in concert. Only 2 firm members escaped the raid, but they were rounded up relatively quickly. Again, from Crime Library, quote, "Seated in court, the twins realized just how thorough Reed and his team had been in their investigation when one of their crew, Billy Exley, was summoned to give evidence. A former bodyguard of Ronnie's, he had helped to organize some of their long frauds. He knew a lot of their secrets, among other things. He had been on watch the day Cornell was killed. His presence as a witness for the prosecution was an ominous warning of things to come. In the East End of London, police informants were sometimes known as wedding men. They liked the weddings but wanted no part in the troubles of life. Another Cockney term to describe them is screamers. People are okay when life is going well, but who scream their heads off when things go wrong. The police called a long list of these people, and their evidence was a crushing blow to the Kray. After 8 months on remand, the Kray twins went to trial early in January 1969. Theirs was to be the longest and most expensive criminal case in British history. Although they had spent years running a criminal empire across the East and West Ends of London, involving long frauds, extortion, strong-arming of club owners, disposal of stolen securities, fraud, blackmail, and assault, the twins, in fact, were only tried and convicted for the murders of George Cornell and Jack McVitie." End quote. Ronald and Reginald Kray got 30 years to life. Their brother Charlie got 10 as an accessory, but he only served 7. Ron was classified as a Category A prisoner, which means he was given the highest level of security and essentially lived in solitary confinement. In 1979, he was committed and spent the rest of his life in Broadmoor. Reggie spent most of his prison stay as a Category B. Violet passed away in 1982. From A Profession of Violence, quote, I used to worry about the twins, of course. I wasn't their mother for nothing. If they was involved in any trouble, I didn't want to know. It only upset me. And as I knew that both of them was good boys at heart, I knew the things people said about them couldn't be true anyhow. I was there one night when Ronnie came back from the police station when they'd beaten him up. And I was there another time when a copper told Ridgie that if there was any more trouble, he'd bash his face in. A mother remembers things like that, and if you have to choose between your boys and the police, what choice is that? Especially if they're all you got. End quote. The twins were allowed to go to her funeral with a massive police escort. Surely so many years in prison meant that this escort was being overcautious. Surely? Well, word is that the twins never wore prison garb, but still sported their bespoke clothing. They ate steak instead of the institutional glop on offer, and in 1985, officials at Broadmoor discovered that from prison, and from separate prisons no less, Ron and Reg were running a lucrative bodyguard business catering to the Hollywood elite. Reg even married again in the late 90s, and yes, he was still in prison. Ron married twice while in Broadmoor. At some point, he figured he was bisexual and no longer hated women. Ronnie had a heart attack on March 15th of 1995 and died 2 days later. Charlie went back to prison in 1997 for smuggling cocaine, died in prison in 2000. Reggie was allowed to attend both funerals under prison guard. Reg learned he had bladder cancer and was released from prison on compassionate grounds in August of 2000. He died on October 1st, the same year. The Krays are still legends. In fact, Tom Hardy played both twins in a movie of just that name. And not for nothing, but I have recently determined that Tom Hardy is an incredibly good actor. Go Tom! Anyway, you can do Kray tours of London. Granted, you can do tours of London almost anything, but not all the other big London gangsters can say the same. So there's that. There are documentaries and books and podcasts. People still talk about the Krays. People still remember them. And I will close this tale out with a final thought from Reggie in our story. Quote, You've read our story now, so now you will know us a little better than you did before. You must judge for yourselves. We did bad things. Yes, we've admitted it. But were we that bad that we must continue to suffer this inhuman treatment year after year after year? Is there no compassion? I once saw these words on a card pinned to another prisoner's cell wall. I would hate, old, gray, and gnarled, and lying on my deathbed, to look at the crack, ever increasing on the ceiling, and cry to myself, God, I wish I had. Often I've looked at the cracks in the ceiling of my prison cell and cried to myself, God, I wish I hadn't. I appeal to the authorities, release us. Hasn't justice been done? And hasn't justice been seen to have been done? Look at the facts, look at the wasted years. Then come and look at a broken man in Broadmoor and a despairing man at Gartree. I think you will know the answer. End quote. If you like the show, please support us by rating, and giving us a review. Contact details are in the show notes, including the Patreon. Simon and Garfunkel will sing you out, and I will talk at you next time on It's All Relative.
I am just a poor boy, though my story is seldom told. I have squandered my resistance for a pocket full of mumbles, such are promises. All lies and jest, still the man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. When I left my home and my family, I was no more than a boy in the company of strangers, in the quiet of the railway station, running scared. Laying low, seeking seeking out the poorer quarters where the ragged people go, looking for the places only they would know. La la la.